Hi everyone, I'm Miranda and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm filming part 3 of my series on books to read when you're self-isolating. So these are some of my favourite cosy reads that always offer me a lot of escapism in the pages when I pick them up, and I hope that you will enjoy them too, if any of these sound appealing to you. Let's get started. I've got quite a pile. So the first book I want to recommend is The Light Years by Elizabeth Jane Howard. This is the first in the Barchester Chronicles series. So many people love this series, and I do too. It's set just before the start of World War II, and the series progresses to just after the Second World War. And it's about a family of brothers, the Cazalet brothers, and their wives and children. And they're all fairly sort of lengthy reads, but you can absolutely just get lost in the world and lost in the pages. And that's what I love about these books. They're just completely all engrossing. Sometimes I hesitate to actually say that these are great cozy reads because there are some quite dark themes that run through the books. There are a lot of troubled marriages, troubled relationships. In this book, there's a very dark theme in that a daughter is sexually harassed by her own father. So in some ways, I wouldn't necessarily label them as cozy reads, but you do just get completely lost in the world, and I love that. They're really great escapist books. The period detail is incredible, and a lot of people do list these books as amongst their very favourite comfort reads, so a lot of people do find them very comforting. I picked this book up on Easter Sunday, which was a very hot day in the UK, and it was the perfect book to just sort of curl up with and read that day. This one is set over 2 or 3 summers at the family house in Sussex. So there are lots of descriptions of hot summer weather, and it really is the perfect book to read as we're moving into summer. So definitely put this one on your list. And then in a somewhat similar vein, I want to recommend I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, which is one of my favourite books to read this time of year. I think it actually starts in April, so it would be a great one to add to your list right now. This book is really funny. It's written in diary form. The perspective is from a young girl called Cassandra, and it's about her very eccentric English family who live in this crumbling castle in the British countryside. The time period is sort of sometime in the 1930s. There aren't any dates given in the book. It's kept kind of deliberately vague, but it is meant to be sometime in the 1930s, I think. Cassandra has an older sister called Rose, who's very beautiful, and interesting things start happening when 2 rich American men move into the big sort of mansion house in the neighbourhood, and one of them falls in love with Rose, and the sisters think that their fortunes are made. Rose famously says in the book that she wishes she were living in like a Jane Austen novel, and it seems like her wish comes true. But events unfold. But it's such a funny, heartwarming book. I love Cassandra, and she's a very sort of literary heroine. The opening line is famous. It goes, "I write this sitting in the kitchen sink." And I think that just immediately pulls you in and makes you want to read about Cassandra and about her eccentric family. So this is definitely one, if you've never read it, then please do so. And then in a sort of similar vein again is The Pursuit of Love by Nancy Mitford, one of my very, very favourite books. I love Nancy Mitford's writing. If you've never read any of her books, then The Pursuit of Love is definitely the place to start, because this book introduces many of the characters that you meet again in more of her novels. So The Pursuit of Love is about a young girl called Fanny, whose mother is nicknamed the Bolter because she keeps running off with different men. And Fanny then is sent to live with her cousins in the countryside. This is a very eccentric family that she goes to. They're very much of the aristocracy, although a rather cash poor. And in fact, the action really centres around Fanny's cousin Linda, who is very glamorous and beautiful and is sort of desperate to marry and to have a sort of house of her own. But her marriage doesn't work out very well, and a lot of the book is about Linda finding her real true love, which eventually she does. There are definitely some tragic undertones to this book too, but I just love the funny, witty style of Nancy Mitford's writing. So this is definitely a book that I want to read when I want some light-hearted entertainment. And then one of my very favourite glorious books is The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Marianne Schaefer and Annie Barrows. This is such an amazing read. I know so many other people love this book too. It's set just after World War II. A young woman, Juliet, who is a writer herself, but she's at a bit of a loose end after the war. She's not quite sure what she wants to do. She is contemplating accepting the proposal of a wealthy American that she's recently met. But then out of the blue, she receives a letter from a man who lives in Guernsey, and he has somehow come across a copy of a book that she used to own, and he writes to her to ask her more about the author of this book, and they start a regular correspondence. And Juliet's interest is really piqued when she realizes that this man, I think Dalsey Adams is his name, is part of a book group called the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, and that this society was first set up to rebel against the curfew that the Nazis set within Guernsey during the German occupation during the war. Juliet decides to go to Guernsey to learn more about this society, and many events ensue after that. This is a wonderful romance. It's a novel written in letter form. If you like that type of novel, then this is definitely one for you. I love epistolary novels, so this is one of my favourites for that reason, but it's also just such a heartwarming, charming story. If you've never read it, then you're definitely in for a treat. And then a wonderful book to read in April is The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. This is one of my very favourite books. I tend to read it every spring. I've mentioned before on this channel how much I love this book. It's about a group of women who don't all know each other, but they end up clubbing together so that they can afford a holiday spent in Italy in this beautiful little castle. It was published in 1922, so it's another book from the interwar years, which is one of my favourite time periods to read about, and it's just such a life-affirming, brilliant read. I can't recommend this highly enough. And then, as I love Elizabeth von Arnim, I had to mention another of her books, which is Elizabeth and Her German Garden. This is very autobiographical, and it's a very slim read. It would just be perfect to settle down with one evening when you just want something light and really enjoyable to relax you. I love the nature writing in this book. Von Arnim writes about her passion for her garden and for nature so beautifully in it. I absolutely love the descriptions. This starts off in May, so it's a lovely book to read this time of year as well. And it's also very funny. Von Arnim describes her sort of the rather difficult husband character in this book, and also various sort of friends that come and stay and get in the way, and it's sort of generally a bit annoying when really she just wants to be able to enjoy her garden in solitude. But it's just such a funny, wonderful book. I highly recommend it. And it's also written in diary form again, so if you like books that are like diaries or journals, then this would be another one to add to your list. Another hilarious read are the Just William books by Richmal Crompton. These are children's books, but they're ones I still adore reading as an adult. I especially enjoy listening to these on Audible, where they're read by Martin Jarvis, and he is the perfect reader for the Just William books. If you like P.G. Wodehouse, then you would really love these books, I think. They're about a young boy called William and his friends whose nickname are the Outlaws, and all of the scrapes that they get into. But William somehow manages to get out of them so often, and they're just really hilarious. I love these books. Again, they're set mainly in the interwar years and into World War II kind of era. I recently finished listening to The Warden on Audible. I've read this book before, but it was also just a really lovely listen for me recently. This is such a charming, gentle, quiet sort of read. I love Anthony Trollope, and I love the Barchester Chronicles, which is about a cathedral town. It's a series of books about a cathedral town and its inhabitants. This is the first in the series, and I so recommend it. If you haven't read the Barchester Chronicles before, then I really recommend getting a copy of The Warden. And then a brilliantly funny read again, because I think we could all do with a bit of a laugh right now, is Queenie by Candice Carter Williams. This is such a brilliant book. I read it last summer, but I was reminded of it again quite recently because it was longlisted for the Women's Prize this year. It's a really hilarious book. There are some, darker, sadder themes to it as well, but it really is about a young woman called Queenie who's trying to navigate work and relationships and friendships in her sort of 20s, and she sort of is failing a bit at everything, but eventually sort of figures it out. And it's really, really funny, and it's just very easy to read, very light. So I really recommend Queenie. And then a non-fiction choice as well is A Fine Romance by Susan Branch. Susan Branch is an American writer, but she's a real Anglophile as well. And this is a beautiful sort of illustrated account of a holiday. I'll just show you the pages so you get a bit of an idea. Her books are just sort of works of art in themselves. I love them. And this one is about a sort of 2-month trip that Susan and her husband took around the UK, and it chronicles their travels, and it's just so interesting to read. If you're an Anglophile too, then you would adore this book, but also if you just enjoy reading people's sort of travel books or memoirs, then this is a real delight. I highly recommend it. And then finally, I wanted to recommend The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. I've mentioned before on my YouTube channel how much I love this book. I know it's a bit dauntingly large, but it's just the sort of book that you get completely engrossed in the world that the author has created. I read this in only 2 or 3 days because I just got completely gripped. I wanted to find out what happened to the heroine, and it is just a sort of book that you can just lose yourself in utterly, and the time just flies by. And that's exactly the kind of book that I want to read right now. So that's why I wanted to mention this book again to you all. It's definitely for fans of Jane Austen. The Other Bennet Sister is about Mary Bennet, who's probably the most overlooked of the Bennet sisters. But Janice Hadlow imagines what happens to Mary after Pride and Prejudice finishes. And so although the novel starts out still well, it starts out just before the time frame of Pride and Prejudice begins. Then part of it is set during the time of Pride and Prejudice, and then the sort of majority of the novel is set after the events of Pride and Prejudice end. So we do glimpse some other favourite characters. We do get a little bit of Lizzie and her marriage to Mr. Darcy, but it's mainly the secondary characters of Pride and Prejudice that Janice Hadlow really focuses on. So there's a lot about the Collinses, Charlotte and Mr. Collins, and Janice Hadlow is really good because she manages to paint formerly quite unlikable characters, including Mary Bennet herself. She manages to paint them in such a sympathetic way that your ideas about these characters really change as you read her book. So it gives a lot of depth to Pride and Prejudice, but still remains very true to Jane Austen feeling, which I think, you know, that's such a tricky balance to achieve. But I think Janice Hadlow just did such a brilliant job of it. There's a lovely description of the Lake District in this book too. Mary Bennet goes on a trip to the Lake District with the gardeners, and romance really starts to blossom for her then. And yeah, I just can't recommend this enough, and it would be a lovely escapist read for right now. But anyway, those are all of my recommendations for books to read when you're self-isolating. Let me know if any of these titles appeal to you, or if you've read any of them already, or what books you're really enjoying right now when we're spending so much more time at home. Thanks so much again for watching this video. Do give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel, which you can do by clicking my face that sort of pops up around here. But yes, thank you for watching, and I'll be back again with another video very soon. Bye!